when you have a lot of people, they can all be, you hired amazing people, they're very intelligent, but as the scope of the task grows, it becomes a lot more like managing organization. Do we know to go and read the right document at the right time? Do we remember our own selves from a year ago? And so a lot of these analogies apply now to agents, and some organizational philosophy comes into how do you make agents effective.
So from the Tessl point of view, context is a big part of the platform that we're building. One of the terms that I know every single day pretty much is agent enablement. This is super important, super powerful. What is agent enablement and what's Tessl's role in that?
Yeah, I feel we should start discussing in sort of outcome-based tools versus sort of the technical element. So context is a very important tool or sort of means, context management of it. I think the eventual goal that you want is to enable the agents. And I find sales enablement actually to be an easier example, even though in development, clearly, like you think about sort of onboarding. So for developers, you can think about you need to onboard a developer. So you have a brilliant developer come along, join the team. You still don't expect them to kind of know how to build well within your organization the very first moment they landed. You need them to be onboarded. So what are the materials they need to read? And then over time, there's some element of continuous training. I think in development, it's a little bit harder to think about systemizing it because we rely a lot of individual kind of skills and individual talents. And, for good or bad, we sort of rely on this institutional knowledge. Sales enablement is an interesting analogy because oftentimes as organizations grow, you want your sales organization to be creative only to a degree. You want them to repeat the playbook. And so sales is a much more structured place in which you say, okay, here are the enablement materials. Hey, and in you, salesperson, you need to read this, but also every existing salesperson, every year at kickoff, we're going to teach you this is the sales process, these are the stages, these are the decks that you need to do, these are the materials, the emphasis, the messaging, like all the things that you need to provide. And then those get measured, and they get monitored, and we identify the cases where some random behavior was successful or when something falls through, and then you redefine a bunch of those practices, and then you train them again, to build those. And so agents are, I think that's maybe a slightly closer technical analogy to what we do with the agent enablement. So your eventual goal is to say, hey, I want agents to work in my organizations and specifically in my development and in my code base. I want them to build well for me. So how do I make them successful? What is the knowledge I need to equip them with? How do I kind of evaluate, role play and test and sort of see that works, which is something we can't do as well with people. We can be a lot more demanding with agents. How do I distribute that knowledge? How do I then observe behavior and sort of see when did it actually happen? And then how do you take that and optimize it? And when we apply it to agents, we see all these super interesting things that we'll continue to share over the next kind of couple of months. Is all these like really interesting observations, like when we look at agent logs and what do they create, you can see how some instructions you put in your context, they just ignore. They just don't do. And you see how other instructions, they will do it when we do the A/B test, when we evaluate with and without those instructions, they do the same thing anyway. So if you try to get it to use Git, it would use Git anyway. But if you try to get it to use a GH, instead as the CLI, you really need to say it in a very specific way to kind of counter the intuitive way. And so if you said Git, you wasted context. If you said GH in the wrong way, you're not going to get your result. So a lot of those, and eventually you have to think about how do I solve it? I've observed a problem, and that comes back to you modify the context. That's your tool. So we think a lot about if you are an organization, you want agents to work for you, you need to enable those agents, and context and the management of that context, the optimization of that context is the means through which you do it.